Greeting viewers. Thank you so much for joining us. We trust that your year is off to a good start. A very warm welcome to both our local and global audience to our very first online forum this year. Your host is Columbia Global Centers Nairobi, which is part of 10 regional hubs positioned around the world by Columbia University. The centers serve as platforms for dialogue and the exchange of knowledge in research, education, as well as public programming. Today, we will be speaking about the biggest hindrance to attracting large-scale green investments in African countries. We will look at how green projects can ensure strong local stakeholder inclusion and a high reinvestment rate of project proceeds in the African region. Research shows that new investment trends are emerging to foster the flow of finance towards environmentally and socially sustainable outcomes. Our panel will dissect this topic in an effort to determine how regional businesses can rise and capture some of these opportunities within the concept of green economy. And now to introduce the members of our panel. Kolbe-In Hilmanson is a Chief Executive Officer at SVAMI. Kolbe-In, a pilot and project manager within the commercial aviation industry and environpreneur, co-founded the first and now largest carbon finance entity in Iceland, applying global standards to build nature-based carbon credits from afforestation, land and wetland restoration, and other land use. Kolbe-In has diverse knowledge across nature and carbon finance, business development, aerospace, and space tech, and on existing and emerging frameworks for sustainability reporting. Kolbe-In will be moderating this conversation as well. Our second panelist is Sylvia Garcia Martinez, who is the Chief Operations and Sustainability Officer at SVAMI. Sylvia leads SVAMI's operations, focusing on data collection, processing, analytics, and delivery, with a master's in science in environmental science and a strong background in applying remote sensing technology to measure natural assets in terrestrial environments. Sylvia leads continuous alignment of SVAMI's solution to best practices in nature indicators. Our final panelist is John Sanders, who is the Chief Operations Officer at SunCulture, an innovative African-based agri-tech company. SunCulture develops and commercializes life-changing technology to solve the biggest daily challenges of the world's 570 million smallholder farming households. John has a track record in building infrastructure for growth stage organizations that leads to institutional and governmental investments. As SunCulture's first Director of Finance and Operations and now COO, he established the human resources, finance and accounting, sales, supply chain, and IT infrastructure. John's passion for creating social impact through operational excellence led him from a 5-year career in private banking at JP Morgan to nearly 10 years in social impact investing and operational leadership in African startups. Over his career, he has worked for clients and organizations in Central America, Africa, and North America. John earned an MBA from Columbia University and a BA in finance from Fordham University. In his free time, John enjoys playing competitive hockey and currently plays for the Nairobi Ice Lions after playing division in college. He is a New Jersey native and currently based between Nairobi and London. We will be posting these bios in the chat area. For our audience, kindly note this program is being recorded and will be uploaded on our YouTube channel. Please participate in this conversation by posting your questions under the Q&A section. And remember to follow us on our social media. We'll be posting our handles in the chat area. I would now like to welcome Kolbe In to introduce and drive this conversation. Welcome, Kolbe In.
Thank you so much, and thank you for having me. As mentioned, I'm Kolbe Hilmarsson. I'm the co-founder and chief executive officer of Svarmi, and I'm really excited to be here today. And I think this is a very interesting conversations to be had, and I'm looking forward to hopefully leading the discussion in a productive manner. As we have moved through introductions of the myself and fellow panelists, I would like to sort of start by just throwing out the guiding questions of the largest challenges that we see to bringing large-scale green investments in Africa and specific countries in Africa. And John, if you could maybe take the ball on this one, and as you have, I would say, of the three of us, by far the most practical experience in this field.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you for having me. I definitely appreciate being part of this panel. So I think for us, we look at it in two different ways. I think you look at kind of funding challenges from like a company level, and then given that we are an asset financing business for farmers, also kind of funding challenges from a customer standpoint, giving the kind of challenges around being able to procure the items that we sell. So I guess from a company level, what we do is we're very innovative, I guess, in terms of like how we go about our funding. Sun Culture, given what we do in our nature, we touch on a lot of different SDGs. And so that enables us to take a very kind of like a blended capital, blended finance approach. So we do go to your traditional financiers, you know, the VCs, the DFIs, and the likes that are kind of interested in investing in climate. But then also concurrently, we also look at partnering with foundations, for example, to help fund very specific initiatives that we might want to undertake. So for us, like the Shell Foundation, for example, has been very supportive of Sun Culture's work over the years. And also they have a big focus on like the solar home system space, as well as just kind of the off-grid space in general. Shell kind of stepped in, provided grant funding to enable us to launch our pay-as-you-go platform, so our financing platform for our customers. And then once that's gotten to a certain level of maturity, we've been able to raise more traditional kind of finance, specifically around kind of receivable financing that we were able to secure from a certain type of investor. I think concurrently looking at our customer base, you know, it takes a lot of kind of like financial innovation to enable people to kind of access our products and services. And so first things first, our products were too expensive for the normal kind of smallholder farmer. That kind of pushed us to do two things. One, how do we continually develop product innovation to drive down the costs? And so there was a lot of grant funding that helped support the R&D push behind that. And then secondly, us developing our own in-house financing mechanism, which we've been doing for about the last 6 years relatively successfully. And then thirdly, getting very innovative in terms of looking at different ways we can continue to push down that cost. And so one thing we're doing right now, for example, is that we've started selling our carbon offsets. You know, a solar pump, you know, replaces or like a diesel or petrol pump. There are, you know, individuals and corporates that are willing to buy these carbon credits. We've gone through the whole accreditation process, the audit, so on and so forth. And the revenue we're generating from our carbon business, we're taking that cash, passing that on to the end user to push that price down even more, with the thought that it will increase our total addressable market, increase the number of units we're selling, and obviously increase, you know, how much carbon we're able to sell as well. So I guess like kind of just backing out, I mean, it's been like a very multi-pronged approach. You know, kind of we needed a lot of creativity, both in terms of like funding the company more broadly, but also for our customer base. But yeah, really that kind of blended finance approach is what has worked for us thus far. Sorry, I think you might be on mute.
I might be on mute. That's correct. So no, you touched upon a lot of interesting points and this sort of blended approach. But I'm quite curious on the carbon credit side of it, as that's, as mentioned in my intro, that's where I come from before joining Svarmi, and I think it's a really interesting mechanism for financing projects that would else not be financially or for other reasons not feasible. So I'm curious on the types of buyers and the types of requirements you see buyers of these offsets or credits make towards you or Sun Culture as a project developer, and how information is gathered in the field on site to really back up the claims made in those projects and those sort of structured credits.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think first and foremost, I mean, I think the carbon markets are extremely exciting, but also very opaque. You see these situations where you have like, kind of like hydroelectric dams in China that are just not in use, but are generating millions of dollars of revenue for those builders. And so obviously, which we're not in that bucket. But it really starts with ensuring that we go with like kind of an accredited agency to help us with the verification process as well as the audit. That was step one. We worked with Verra, who actually has run into some issues with the clean cook stove market relatively recently, but they still are kind of well known throughout the industry. I think secondly, it's a lot of like in terms of the types of buyers, it's honestly like a mixture. You have kind of like the individuals who want to buy kind of small lots, just be involved with like a project like ours. But then you also have like your big corporates as well too. That big monstrous companies that I was actually surprised that they were in the carbon market so aggressively on that end. I think the third thing is like the price on the carbon market is it just swings all over the place. And so one of the things that we're doing right now is that, given that our project essentially touches on 13 SDGs, in theory, there's somebody who's willing to pay a premium for access to our credits. But it really comes down to the individual buyer. Just because maybe there's 5 SDGs that mean a lot to me versus 3 for somebody else, we might be buying at different levels. And so there's a lot of different strategy that's gone into this. Ensuring that we're not getting locked into too long of contracts, for example, but also trying to figure out who will give us the most upfront funding for a fair discount has been something. And then in terms of the actual monitoring and tracking, all of our devices are IoT enabled. And so we have a dashboard where, people can go in and see, actually the unit is being used, at this frequency and kind of offsetting X amount of carbon. But again, the industry is so young that there's a lot of opportunity for innovation, but unfortunately there's a lot of opportunity for some silliness too. And so it's been an exciting journey for us, a bit of an uphill battle, I think, in terms of some of the stuff that's come out relatively recently, but we still feel pretty excited about where we sit. The last thing I would note is that our CEO, Samir Ibrahim, has done a wonderful job in terms of making sure that, we're at the forefront of some of these buyers. And so we recently hosted an event of, I think it was like 50 like buyers, individuals, corporates, so on and so forth. One event in Paris, one event in London, bringing people together to highlight projects like Sun Culture. Another company that does something similar is Cocoa Networks in the clean cook stove space. It's Systemo Bio to do kind of biogas digesters as well in a lot of markets such as Kenya. So kind of taking a holistic approach with other folks who are some of these good projects has been the strategy that we've kind of put forth thus far.
So if I would add on that, I mean, what we've been doing at Svarmi is really on supporting, I would say, both sides of the equation when it comes to land-based carbon, but also biodiversity and nature. And it's both on assessing the positive impact of projects such as the one you're describing, mainly that though in direct land use where you're implementing afforestation or restoration of specific land, but also using a similar process on the negative impact side, or evaluating the potential negative impact of necessary infrastructure that's planned to be built. And Sylvia, I'd be curious just to hear from you, like if you would explain to me and the audience of what does it mean to go through this sort of baseline assessment or environmental impact assessment, and how do you see this evolving based on how we've been working with our clients the past few years?
Yeah, so the situation in Svarmi is like we were using drone images and satellite images always for see the nature impacts and the nature situation in right now in the world, and this was helping us just to understand how we will just like focus our efforts in the things and methodologies that we were using, and based on the environmental impact assessment, just the process that it makes you just by regulations and by law, just you need to give specific steps just to follow them, and one of them is just to see what is the initial situation of the land, and if you have some specific endemic species or other kind of species that can be fragile in the area, that it has to be considered in that. So the point of Svarmi just in the AI is just like giving the access of the actual situation of the area before they're actually gonna do some impact on it.
And what you mentioned there, I mean, how do environmental impact assessment regulations differ? Are they different between different locales in the world?
Yeah, they are different based on the European Union or in another places in globally. So this is also something difficult for us because you cannot just standardize the way of how you want to take the data and also how they're going to implement it in their projects. So it's based on country base, yes.
So, and I think this touches upon an interesting point, and sort of tying the two together. I mean, carbon credits, environmental impact assessments for large infrastructure is really data standardization and sort of at least finding common ground in providing this transparency that I believe that most investors are after, and understanding. I mean, you mentioned, John, that you had these sessions with project or purchasers of credits to sort of give them a better tie into the project. And I think it feels like this is a big conversation on the transparency and understanding, being able to simplify the methodologies and how you came to this conclusion of either having a go or no go on a large infrastructure to be built somewhere, or this project being approved with this X amount of credits to be issued on the baseline. So, John, would you concur on this, that it's information is one of the sort of key pillars of on both sides of the equation?
Yeah, no, I think you're spot on. I think it's that access to information, that sharing. I mean, again, it's a new market for so many different people, and so really kind of that training and get people comfortable with it. Again, one of the big benefits for us is that all of our units are IoT enabled, and so we can easily report on how often the pump is being used. I mean, there's a lot of different data points that we can kind of dig in on, and so for us, it's definitely been helpful to help kind of bridge that gap in terms of, I guess, a misunderstanding or almost a mistrust due to kind of what we've seen with some of the historical players within the space.
Mm-hmm. And I guess to that extent, it's also about making it practical. Like the data collection and information collection is not only about leveraging whatever cool technology is out there or reinventing the wheel, so to say. It's rather on also finding transparent ways to collect information. As you mentioned, that in your case the devices are IT enabled, but that could also be actually activating data collection on the ground from local communities and so forth.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, like it's our company is very kind of like a data first, data driven, organization. And so even the IoT functionality that we have on the units, this was way before we even thought about anything in the carbon space. We use the IoT technology both for remote monitoring purposes, just to see when people are using the unit. So for example, it's better for somebody to irrigate in the morning when the sun is very low, because obviously, there's not as much evaporation as opposed to if you're doing it during peak sunlight. But we use all this information to try to nudge the customer in ways to help them better use the asset. Additionally, if somebody is not using the asset appropriately, i.e., not paying or, kind of trying to run off with the kit, it also enables us to both track and remotely, turn that unit off. I think it's really exciting kind of as you progress forward because, we can start getting into things like, after sales, predictive maintenance, as well as looking at, we do some really cool projects around correlating asset utilization demographic information and repayment information to develop these kind of customer profiles that we can do nudges or automated kind of messages to these customers, both to help them improve their farming outcomes, but also to help us further secure the stability of our paygo portfolio. So yeah, there's a lot of cool ways you can use the data, but yeah, for the carbon space particular, it's been very beneficial, and I think should continue to be beneficial for us moving forward.
So building on this, Sylvia, I mean, what do you see as the biggest challenge moving forward in establishing? I mean, one thing is monitoring like the projects that are implemented, but establishing baseline scenarios and updating those baseline scenarios based on what's happening in the surrounding environment, and baseline then referring to what would have happened if not for the implementation of this. What do you see as the biggest challenges in continually assessing baseline scenarios, for example, of nature-based solutions?
So basically what we are just struggling right now is with the amount of data that we have, historical data for the comparison when you are checking conservation and restoration areas, but also like how good the data is, because some, even though they are actualized, they are not like good enough for what's the purpose of what you are looking for. And when we are talking about nature, it's like a lot of intercorrelation and connection per se, that is not only one metrics that gives you the answers of what you are looking for. And it's very base focus on the location part. So it's depends of course which country you are. It's gonna be more important some aspects than others, but also inside the same country, it's just like based on the location of inside the country is going to be completely different. So right now it's mainly data that we have, mainly just to have like a monitoring part where you can actually follow how it's like the nature it's evolving and changing.
And maybe to this point, I think it's interesting the way John is describing their operations, how it's really enabled by bottom-up reporting, where you have data collection happening at the very core of the operations. And to this extent, at Svarmi, we've been working with companies that are globally active. They have a global footprint. They have a complex supply chain. And now with emerging requirements for companies like these to report on their overall corporate nature impact, this becomes a huge challenge, especially if you're going to go into this sort of bottom-up reporting instead of top-down estimations based on whatever data is available. And that's where I think it's, I feel like these two sides of the equation, looking at like the mandatory disclosures that companies have to fulfill and what's the innovation that's happening on the project level, where it feels, at least in my view, that there could be a lot of synergies and ways to learn from each other, and to not just invent new processes, new requirements, and think that we need to reinvent the wheel to comply with those. And to that extent, I'm curious on also your view of this, John, in like the bottom-up approach, and how you see that playing out in these sort of different avenues.
Yeah, I mean, we're at an interesting stage right now where we're really trying to figure out what we do with all this data and how to kind of partner with, right organizations. Going to our conversation that we had yesterday, one of the things that we're realizing is that given that we have a pretty robust, customer base, not just in Kenya, but in 5 other sub-Saharan African markets, and the fact that we've been like very data first kind of approach, we are sitting on just like a treasure trove of information. So again, one of the examples that I was alluding to earlier, we can bring on, we brought on this consultant. She's like an expert in the MFI space, but we can run all this really interesting analysis and look at, again, that asset utilization. So I can tell you what the profile of somebody who is probably going to be a good farmer based on their demographic information, their repayment information, and how and when they're actually using the system that we sold to them. Like that's super powerful, but then it's like, where do you go with it? And we've actually faced a lot of challenges, within Kenya. Like I'll give you a perfect example. I won't name the bank, but to me, it doesn't make any sense that our customers can't get access to traditional finance, the majority of them. So these are people who, probably don't have a bank account or have had a very small, limited interaction with like a formal financial institution. Now, it doesn't make sense to me that, we have a robust KYC process. We have repayment information. We can issue statements, everything that, in theory, we should be able to go to almost any bank in Kenya and say, hey, look, here's 50,000 people who we have all this great data on. Would love to share this with you. And can you lend to them moving forward? And maybe the next iteration of, their customer journey, we're doing, financing through, a local bank's balance sheet versus financing through our own. What we found with these local banks is that a lot of times the amount of collateral that is needed, and just the requirements, the customers just kind of, shy away from that. And so we're really trying to figure out, okay, if we can't go to the formal financial institutions, what else can we do with this information? And so one that we're doing right now that is really exciting is that we can take the information that we have in hand. We've partnered with other companies within the ag value chain. One I would highlight, there's a really good soil testing company in Kenya or in East Africa that we work with. We are digitizing the customer's soil analysis. Within that, obviously, we're looking at how much carbon their soil is capturing too, so it helps us hopefully boost the price of our offsets. And then we put it all into a customer portal where a customer can then log in, see all their information, from us. The IoT information, the repayment information, if they want to report an after sale, whatever it might be, it's all right there. But then also digitizing the soil analysis as well, and then being able to share with them kind of like customized irrigation guidance or kind of specific recommendations as it might relate to types of fertilizers, pesticides that they should use that might be beneficial for their soil or the types of crops that they're growing. But we're in such an early stage of this that it's really about finding those right partners and figuring out how you can work together, to kind of push it forward. But it's such an exciting time, I think, to be in the space specifically as it relates to the data that we're able to collect.
So would it make sense to, like, looking at these two sides where you have a relatively small farm operation that may at the end be supplying a very large company, and I feel like a lot of the larger companies, especially in the food and beverage sector, they have maybe an idea of the tier one suppliers, but moving beyond that, it's very complex. And of course, like, there's a lot of work to be done in just supply chain analysis in general. But if we assume that this sort of traceability of supply would get even further, do you think the data being collected there could be then readily available once the gap is bridged, and this could be information that you can provide parallel to the product you provide, or the commodity you provide, and that could be actually used to make it more valuable, to have more information behind it.
Yeah, and it's so circular too, right? So you're spot on. We're not necessarily there yet, but like we should be in a spot where we can go to like a large buyer of, say, bananas, whatever it might be, and then tell them that we can say within a pretty high degree of confidence that we have this subset of customers who are growing bananas in these locations, and we know that they're using this type of fertilizer, and they're irrigating at these recommended amounts. So just literally by just doing the math, we should be able to say within a decent degree of confidence what their expected yield would be, and then see if we can get down to actually grading the quality. It's something that we actually tried in the past. It was too early on, but what we saw is that there was a large off-taker in Kenya. I'm sure the folks who are on the line from Kenya know of Twiga Foods. They've kind of moved away from the smallholder farmer because they couldn't control quality. It was really hard for them to control quality. But we looked at it from a sense saying, like, hey, you guys are buying bananas from farmers. We're working with farmers to increase their yields. How do we partner up and make this work? And so we actually co-located one of our sales and service centers. It's like a 20-foot shipping container onto one of their depots are. So a farmer could go drop off their produce. They could literally walk next door, see a demo of our farm, and get access to finance and get access to our units, all within the same space. And I think like that's obviously much more tangible, but there's a way to kind of do this through data, which is pretty exciting. And so for us, like the first step into that is increasing the stickiness of our customer portal, to ensure our farmers are actually using it, and not just using it to check balance, but doing things like irrigation training, some on-demand ordering, and so on and so forth of inputs. But then further down the line, kind of making it a platform where you can plug in different players within the ag value chain, and we can kind of help guide them along that route. We've had a lot of interest from like some of the larger input providers, and so we work with the likes of like Syngenta, TMAC Agro is another big one. And then also there's a company in Kenya that we're working with called Sanergy, which is a fantastic, they do kind of like a fertilizer from human waste. But yeah, there's different ways that we can kind of plug in, give our customers more access to this information, but furthermore, hopefully boost their yields and boost their incomes in the end. But we're still in the early days, but it's really, really exciting, really exciting time to be playing in space.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think maybe just looking at a parallel, I mean, now thinking about food and beverage sector that have complex supply chains and they're really reliant on understanding the impact of their suppliers. Of course, that applies to almost every company, but then you have sectors that have more of their, especially nature and biodiversity impact in their direct operations. When you look at mining, you look at energy production. And Sylvia, interesting to hear from you. And one of the sort of guiding questions we had for today's talk was are we seeing these globally active companies with operations in different continents being exposed to the same level of scrutiny when they're operating globally outside of their home country versus when they're in their home country that may or may not have more rigid regulations? So is there a consistency in how they gather information and especially on biodiversity
Yeah, so when we are talking about globally taking data and all this, it's unfortunately because we can actually see where are like locations where it's like more easable just to get data from, and where like just not only taking data but any kind of data. When I'm talking about data, sometimes I'm more referred about nature data and research about whatever biodiversity topic can be, but of course everything is valuable. Even like cadastral data, it's valuable for some of the research that we are doing just based on the location of the owner's land and things like that. So it's sometimes it's like we are forgetting about that, but yes, it's just like it depends of where the country is, the company, and if the company is globally and they have different locations globally, it's harder, more like in some areas than others, just based on the data that you can collect and you have.
So it becomes more difficult to aggregate to the company level, perhaps, when you have these sort of different data sets available for each country. And interesting. So I think it's also interesting to look at. I mean, one of the thesis here, we've talked a lot about the smallholder farmer, but also looking at larger infrastructure being built in larger projects. I'd be curious to hear your thoughts, John, on some of the biggest challenges that you've noticed in Nairobi, for one, where these projects are being planned and built. Like, are there bottlenecks? Are there things that are slowing down the process more than they should be? Or when we look at, for example, like the big topic of decarbonization, energy security in Europe, it feels like there's at the same time we see nature and other topics becoming even more important in the eyes of the world. So at the same time we want to move faster, but we also want to do better in the assessment. So do you see any sort of thresholds or obstacles there?
Yeah, I mean, it's a slippery slope, and folks in Nairobi definitely understand this. But I mean, you've seen a boom of building in Nairobi. I mean, in the last 10 years, like just from like the roads and expressways that have been put in, it's great because like you're not stuck in traffic like you were before, but it all comes at a cost, right? And so even zooming outside of like the kind of like the ESG side of things as it relates to this kind of boom in building, there's a lot of questions, I guess, within the Kenyan government specifically in terms of like who got these contracts, how they got them, are they priced correctly, so on and so forth. And so, you look at the railway that was built, from Mombasa that's supposed to continue on to Kampala and how that was financed. You look at the rebuilding of the road that goes from Nairobi to Mombasa. It's great for us, but it's just kind of, did they mortgage some of the future? Is there some risk concerns of some of the assets that were, I guess, kind of backed as collateral there on what does that mean? So there's a lot of questions there. As it relates to the environmental side of it, I think obviously it depends by market. I definitely think it's like something that people keep in mind, but I think there's also very big challenges that people are trying to overcome as well too, that they kind of skirt around it. I think if you look at the conversations at COP 27 or wherever it might be, a lot of it is like, why are countries, specifically African countries, kind of being held to this low carbon kind of initiative, when it's like, traditionally they've been the ones that have been kind of the least pollution. Like our farmers, the thing that's crazy to us is that our farmers are probably one of the lowest contributors to climate change, right? But they are the people that get impacted the most on it. Like, how is that fair? And I think if you kind of zoom out Kenya as a country or some of these other countries individual, Kenya, there is a drought, there is serious, issues with like, food security at the moment. And a lot of that is not necessarily the fault of, the Kenyan government in particular. So, should they think twice about, some of the things that they're building or doing and the environmental impact, or, should this be more, on the shoulders of, some of the large, US, European, Asian countries that, have been more of the larger contributors to climate change in the past. That's above my pay grade to kind of figure that out, but I think it's very evident. I think if anybody on the call who lives in Kenya in particular can definitely attest to that.
Yeah, and I think that's a really, really good point, and one I would say, at least I don't have the background on to fully understand, but I think this is just in general, we hear a lot about the environmental impact assessment being often a big threshold to actually being able to build critical infrastructure. And as you said, like that, I think it's unfair or unreasonable to estimate that we stop or slow down the building of critical infrastructure moving forward, and that these assessments actually need to become even better, but still they need to become faster, and they can't be slowing down critical infrastructure, critical buildups. But on that note, I think it's maybe interesting to see if we have any questions from the participants that we can address, but also curious to hear if you have anything to add prior to opening the floor.
Yeah, nothing on mine to add.
So who's gonna come with the first question? Yes, we have Wanja. Am I pronouncing that correctly? Sorry.
Yes, she will be able to speak.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much for this talk, and at the same time, Karibu Kenya. I'm happy to see John is doing this work in Kenya, and also in fact, you've mentioned something about bananas. I know usually the stands are usually longer; they stay on in the farm for quite some time. Are there other crops you are thinking of, like plantations of avocado as they keep increasing? And also just say a little bit more about what you're trying to link soil inputs and carbon storage in relation to, where should we go? Should we continue with manure and forget about fertilizer? Or how should we move forward? Thank you very much.
Yeah, no, thanks for your question. So we deal with all types of crops. I mean, I was just giving bananas as an example, but any farming. And I think it's just, we're talking about, crop-wise, but also we have a lot of our farmers that, it makes sense that a cow that has more access to water is going to, produce more milk. And so, we work with farmers, whether it's bananas, cows, avocados, whatever it might be. I think the big thing for us is that trying to figure out how do you move a farmer from being, growing like a low value crop like maize to growing like an onion. Like that just is a game changer. And then understanding that, maize, you're doing the kind of rain-fed irrigation versus like if you're using, solar powered irrigation, specifically, you probably can get 3 growing seasons as opposed to maybe 1 or 2 on the rain-fed side. And then thirdly, I think like also to add just kind of securing yourself against climate change, if you have access to water, whether it's a borehole, you know, a dam, river, whatever it might be, you know, you're in a good spot even when, you know, things are, when the rains haven't come for quite some time. And so like I was in Matanya a couple of weeks ago, and it is dry. Like it's just brown. It's really, really, really bad. You know, Matanya itself, like the population there, like you're having serious food security issues, you know, with, you know, just with folks that are living there. But the farmers that we work with who obviously have, you know, access to water, their fields are green, you know, they're growing. And obviously, you know, it's a whole supply and demand thing, but if you're able to, you know, sell when the supply is low, you know, that obviously, you know, helps considerably. So again, to kind of round out that first part of your question, you know, we work with farmers across more or less anything that needs water. You know, our solutions will work. For bananas in particular, it really comes down to, instead of using your traditional kind of you know, 20 to 30 centimeter spacing on the drip, you're doing kind of more of these drip button emitters things. So it's more like a customized drip system that we can put together. But that's a separate conversation. As it relates to the carbon piece. So again, what we're doing is, you know, we're able to say that we're able to offset carbon because customers are either switching from diesel or petrol pumps, or they're avoiding using them altogether and just using solar. And so there is an estimate in terms of like how many tons of carbon you're preventing going into the atmosphere on a yearly basis. And then there's an estimate in terms of like what the lifetime, how long will the system be used for. And then there's buyers on the other end that are essentially saying, okay, it offsets this much carbon for this many years, you know, I'm willing to pay a price of X. And that's where it gets a little shaky in terms of like how much they're wanting to pay. Some want to pay 10, some want to pay 30. You're trying to figure that out. But for us, what we do is we're passing the revenue we're generating from those offsets on to the end user. So we're not just putting it in our pockets, but we're saying, look, we can drop the price. We can drop the prices honestly by like 30, 40% as we sell these. It depends on the assumption we have on the carbon side, but it's a pretty aggressive, you know, discount. We did a study with BCG last year, which is really cool, where we looked at the price of our highest selling unit. It's about 130,000 Kenyan shillings, so about 1,300 USD, 1,000 to 1,300 USD. And the total addressable market as it relates to Kenyan smallholder farming households at that price point, even if it was financed for roughly $45 per month, was only about 4% of Kenyan households, farming households. And so, you know, just kind of scratching the surface. But when you drop that price aggressively using, you know, carbon, using results-based financing schemes, you know, subsidies around that, and you can get it to a point around $500 to $600, you're able to reach roughly 51% of Kenyan farming households there. But in order for us to get there, again, we need to ensure that we're able to sell our carbon at an attractive price, as well as, you know, help influence governments to bring in, you know, subsidies into the market, which we're doing both, you know, successfully as of right now, you know, at the moment. The piece on the soil testing in particular is that it really gets into the nitty gritty details, but if we can look and say that, you know, the soil that we've tested at the point of when we've installed the unit versus when 2-3 years down the line, if you can look at, you know, the carbon levels in the soil there, if there's any type of, you know, carbon capture happening there might be a play to kind of like say on aggregate how much, you know, carbon we'll be able to extract from the atmosphere. But right now, it's really just kind of helps. It's kind of just another data point to kind of help hopefully push up the price that we can achieve on the carbon side. But again, going back to the whole conversation, it's all data driven. It's also important to have the data to enable to do that. Okay. Yeah, I think that answers my question. Any feedback or thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I at least from my side, I thought it was really interesting how you mentioned this sort of, maybe we didn't go into it in the beginning of just like what you mentioned of the, like how you generate carbon credits, like what's the baseline scenario and what are you implementing, and as a result, you're either reducing the emissions that's happening or actually having that sort of carbon capturing or sequestration. And I think this is really interesting as an alternative method to just do things that otherwise wouldn't be feasible. And I do think that's a critical element into a just transition. So there's not only just looking at building up expensive carbon capture technology based like carbon capture solutions, with companies that have the capacity to invest in that by themselves, but also just moving into these projects where the impact is the most, and looking at like financing impact and really being data driven on how much the impact is. So I think that's any further questions? Q&A.
Yes, there's one in the Q&A section. Where do you see ties with this important work on the Columbia University in Africa and globally of students, researchers, and faculty who are focused on integrating data, agriculture, nature-based solutions, climate, and etc.?
Yeah, I'm happy to jump on that one real quick, because we've done a lot of stuff with Columbia in the past, and so there's it's obviously there's a lot of resources within Columbia to start. So what we've done internally is that we do leverage. So I went to the Columbia Business School, graduated in 2014, so kind of had the inside track of like all the different potential resources there. And so what we've done is we do a lot of work with the Social Enterprise Office in particular, and then like some stuff with the Earth Institute, but getting students to come over and work with us and kind of open them up to kind of what a career in kind of like climate could look like has been very helpful. But it's just a huge resource for us. And so again, we have a kind of a rolling kind of internship kind of fellowship program that we work with Columbia on, specifically the B School but trying to open that up to even further, to actually include. Actually, I had an interview yesterday with somebody from the engineering school that I hope will join us over the summer, as well as kind of help having Columbia use us as an example of companies that are trying to solve some of these big crazy challenges. And so Columbia University at COP27 in Egypt actually hosted a roundtable event where our head of climate, the person who does all the carbon related projects, spoke, and it was President Columbia, Dean of the B School, and then some folks from the Tamer Center as well did this roundtable discussion there. And so yeah, for me, I'm just constantly in contact, so specifically with the B School, the folks at the Tamer Center, just kind of like keeping them up to speed in terms of what we're doing, but also kind of just poking around in terms of what resources could be available. Because there's just there's so many resources, both funding, but also in terms of just kind of human capital within the school, that it's just keeping that conversation fresh has been helpful.
Yeah, and if I would add to that, at least from my view, is that it's what you touched upon is really the global element, and like what we're the ones hosting us today, the global settings. I think that's really such an important topic into both on the climate and nature side. So you mentioned COP27, and Sylvia and I, we were actually at COP15 for biodiversity in Montreal in December, and it was really, biodiversity is so local, and it's so difficult to create policies or frameworks or technologies even, or solutions to apply globally without consideration to the different localities. So I think that's also really important, is of course access to human capital, and not just human capital from a single place on Earth. It's really on the diversity and the access to different regions, different real experiences of how the world works in different locations. So are there any further questions? I see here by Lisa Phillips that the Columbia Climate School would love to explore partnership opportunities, and at least not sure whether that's geared towards either one of these companies, but I can at least say from our side, we're very much excited to further deepen our relationship with Columbia, as we see just as a leader in these just new subjects. And it's one I like to talk about, is that there are so many new positions that the companies haven't hired before, and all of a sudden, I mean, Sylvia, you're an environmental expert, and I believe you didn't see the demand for environmental scientists that just a few years ago that there is today, and just down to the very specific fields, and being able to bridge also science and business together is really an important element, which is also why we're really excited to further strengthen our relationship with Columbia, because we feel there is a very strong connection between business and science. And I think that's probably going to be critical moving forward. So at least that's, if there are no further questions, I've tried to do my best in moderating today's session, but it's been a great pleasure speaking with both of you and getting all of the great questions. And I hope we were able to at least go through some of the topics here. But again, we're not going to solve all of these issues in one call, but at least I've learned a lot that I plan to take into my next steps. And I think it's really about bridging the gaps that exist between different technologies, different regions, and I'm just happy to have been invited to be a part of this today.
No, likewise. Yeah, thank you so much for moderating and the feedback from the team. Been really exciting to be a part of it. And I can post. I think you guys have all of our information. But yeah, on behalf of us, please feel free to reach out. We'd love to keep the conversation going.
Yeah, the same for me. It was super interesting to see John's work and see how the approach of local communities in this kind of projects, that they are super important in the nature topic, and just don't forget that we need that knowledge people to be able to create these frameworks and make it work actually.
So Pauline, if there's no final words from your side, I guess we can conclude the session at this point.
My colleague Sandra will close for us.
Yep. Okay.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for joining us today. We are very grateful that you have taken time outside your day to discuss this pertinent issue. We hope to continue to partner with you and even deepen partnerships with Columbia University, as we see it's an area of interest. So as you go about your day or evening, we wish you all the best and hope to see you again in another session. Thank you so much.
Cheers. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.